Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to step back in time? Not through some magical portal or scientific invention, but through the careful restoration of walls that once witnessed your earliest joys and sorrows. For Michael Soares, this wasn't a daydream. It was an unsolicited collision of past and present, orchestrated by the one person who knew the power of his unspoken regrets. "I just want to say goodbye to it," he had told his daughter Elisa, his voice carrying the weight of 7 decades of longing. Even if it's just an empty lot now. What Michael didn't know as he made the journey back to his childhood town was that for 2,555 days, every weekend, holiday, and stolen moment, his daughter had been secretly rebuilding the framework of his earliest memories, board by board, nail by nail. The house that financial tragedy had torn from his family now stood restored, waiting for his return. But can you truly go home again? And what happens when the ghost of a place you've carried in your heart suddenly materializes before your eyes, not as the crumbling remnant you expected, but as something both achingly familiar and startlingly new? This is the story of a daughter's extraordinary secret, a father's unexpected journey, and the house that binds them both to a past that was never quite finished. The rental car hummed beneath Michael Soares as he drove down the narrow country road, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. At 63, his knuckles had begun to resemble the gnarled roots of the oak trees that lined these forgotten byways, the same trees he'd climbed as a boy, fearless and unaware that life could change in an instant. "You don't have to do this, Dad," Elisa said from the passenger seat, her dark eyes so much like her mother's watching him carefully. "We can turn around, go back to the hotel." Michael shook his head, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I need to see it, even if there's nothing left." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the countryside, gilding the rolling hills in amber light. It had been 51 years since Michael had last traveled this road, a lifetime ago. Yet his muscle memory recalled every curve, every dip, every landmark. The old Miller barn was gone now, replaced by a modern farmhouse. The creek, where he'd caught tadpoles, had been partially diverted, but the mountains in the distance remained unchanged, eternal sentinels watching over the landscape of his childhood. "It should be just around this bend," he murmured, more to himself than to Elisa. His daughter shifted in her seat, and had he been paying closer attention, he might have noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, the slight catch in her breath. "Did I ever tell you about the summer I built a fort in the south pasture?" Michael asked, his voice taking on the dreamy quality it always did when he spoke of this place. "Your grandmother was furious when I dragged her good sheets out there. But your grandfather just laughed and helped me reinforce the walls with fallen branches." "You told me," Elisa said softly. "You said it was the first thing you ever built." "My first architectural disaster," Michael chuckled. "It collapsed after the first rain. But I learned more from that soggy mess than I did in my first year of architecture school." The car rounded the final curve and Michael's words died in his throat. He eased his foot off the accelerator, letting the vehicle coast to a stop in the middle of the empty road. There, nestled against the hillside, stood a white 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch. The afternoon light caressed its freshly painted exterior, windows gleaming like mirrors reflecting the golden hour. A massive oak tree, impossibly familiar, still stood guard at the edge of the property, its branches reaching toward the house as if in perpetual embrace. Michael's hands fell from the steering wheel into his lap. "I don't understand," he whispered, his voice suddenly fragile. "It should be gone by now, or falling apart at the very least." He turned to his daughter, confusion etched in the lines of his face, only to find her eyes brimming with tears and something else, anticipation, fear, hope, all intermingled in a look he couldn't quite decipher. "Elisa?" She reached across the console and took his hand in hers. "Dad," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. "Welcome home." 6 months earlier, Elisa had stood in her Chicago apartment, phone pressed to her ear, trying to keep the worry from her voice. "How was the appointment, Dad?" On the other end, Michael sighed. "Same as always, more tests, more medications, more cautious optimism that doesn't sound very optimistic." The winter light filtered through her windows, casting long shadows. Across her drafting table, where sketches of her latest renovation project lay scattered. 7 years of secret weekends and holidays had transformed her father's childhood home from a dilapidated shell into something extraordinary, but time was becoming her enemy. The doctor mentioned something about taking it easy. Michael continued. Suggested I might want to get my affairs in order, whatever that means at my age. Elisa closed her eyes, leaning against the window frame. At 35, she'd built a successful career as an interior designer. Her work, featured in prestigious magazines and sought after by Chicago's elite. Her apartment reflected her professional aesthetic. Clean lines, thoughtful details, a perfect balance of form and function. But among the carefully curated spaces of her life, a clock was ticking. Have you thought more about what we discussed? At Christmas, she asked, about taking that trip. The silence that followed told her everything. Her father, once a towering figure in Chicago's architectural world, had always avoided looking back. After losing his childhood home at 12, he'd channeled that loss into creating perfect spaces for others. After losing his wife, Elisa's mother, to cancer 7 years ago, he'd retreated further into his work until retirement forced him to face the emptiness of his carefully designed life. I've been thinking about the old house lately, he finally said, surprising her. Strange dreams. I'm standing on the porch, but I can't seem to open the door. Elisa's gaze drifted to the framed photograph on her desk, the only image she had of the original house, a yellowed snapshot she'd found in her grandmother's attic. It had been her blueprint, her North Star during the renovation. What do you think that means? She asked carefully. Probably means I'm getting old and sentimental, Michael laughed, but it was hollow. Anyway, Clara from next door brought over another casserole. I'll be buried in Pyrex dishes before this is over. Elisa allowed the subject change, making a mental note to send Clara a thank you gift. Her father's neighbors had become her allies, keeping an eye on him while never revealing her secret project. She'd told no one except her best friend Rachel, who thought she was insane to pour every spare penny and moment into a house her father might never see. After ending the call, Elisa crossed to her closet and pulled out the battered leather notebook that contained 7 years' worth of renovation notes, swatches, photographs, and receipts. What had started as an impulsive purchase, a rundown, farmhouse she'd discovered was for sale during a nostalgic internet search of her father's hometown, had evolved into a mission. Her phone pinged with a text from her contractor in rural Pennsylvania. Restored hardwood floors finished in sitting room. Historical Society found period-appropriate doorknobs. Sent pics to your secure email. This was her real life, the dual existence she'd created. In Chicago, she was Elisa Suarez, rising star of interior design. In Pennsylvania, she was the mysterious woman restoring the old Suarez place with obsessive attention to detail, working tirelessly during stolen weekends and scheduled business trips. She'd never intended for the project to take 7 years, but authenticity took time, and finding historically accurate materials while incorporating modern systems without compromising the house's character had been a monumental challenge. Every design decision was filtered through a singular question: would this make my father feel at home? Elisa closed the notebook and returned it to its hiding place. Her father's declining health had created a new urgency. The house was nearly complete, but the real challenge remained: how to bring a man who had spent a lifetime avoiding his past face to face with a physical manifestation of his most bittersweet memories. The answer had come in his most recent call, in his quiet admission about dreams of a house where he couldn't open the door. Perhaps he was finally ready to turn the handle. The early spring rain tapped against the windows of Michael's suburban Chicago home as he sorted through decades of accumulated papers. His kitchen table had disappeared beneath stacks of blueprints, old photographs, and file folders, the physical artifacts of a celebrated architectural career. This is pointless, he muttered to himself, running a hand through his silver hair. His doctor had suggested organizing his personal affairs, but facing a lifetime of memories was proving more exhausting than expected. The doorbell rang, offering a welcome interruption. He opened the door to find Elisa, rain-speckled and carrying 2 paper bags of groceries. "Surprise inspection," she announced, brushing past him into the house. "I figured you haven't been eating properly." Michael followed her to the kitchen, watching as she assessed the chaos on the table with raised eyebrows. "Spring cleaning in April?" she asked, setting a tack, but a warning sign. "He needs to reduce stress and make some significant lifestyle changes," the doctor explained, "and he needs to take the treatment options we've discussed seriously." Later, sitting beside her father's hospital bed, Elisa watched him stare out the window at the Chicago skyline, a contradiction of vulnerability and stubbornness in his posture. "I've been thinking about what you said," he admitted suddenly. "About what?" "Going back to the old house." His fingers picked at the edge of the hospital blanket. "I think I need to see it. Before I make decisions about treatment, about what comes next, I need to close that chapter properly." Elisa's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I've spent 50 years building spaces for other people to create memories in. Maybe it's time I faced my own." He turned to her, his eyes clear despite the medication. "Will you come with me?" "Of course," she said, squeezing his hand. "We'll go as soon as you're better." "Not soon," he corrected. "Now." "Well, as soon as they release me." "The doctor said a quiet trip wouldn't hurt as long as I take it easy." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Besides, what's the worst that could happen? The house is probably long gone. I just need to see the land, say my goodbyes." Elisa felt a moment of panic. The house was ready, had been for months, but she wasn't. She'd imagined this moment differently, had planned a careful revelation. Now everything was accelerating. "Let me make the arrangements," she said, her mind already racing through logistics. "It'll take a few days to organize." Michael agreed, settling back against his pillows. "You know, I never told your mother everything about that house, about what it meant to me." "Tell me," Elisa said, grateful for the chance to gauge his true feelings. "It wasn't just a house to me. It was safety, possibility." His eyes took on a faraway look. "My father built the porch swing himself. Not very well. It creaked terribly and listed to the left, but he was so proud of it. My mother planted sunflowers along the south wall. They grew taller than the first-floor windows." Each detail was a confirmation of Elisa's research, of the choices she'd made in the restoration. The swing she'd commissioned from a local craftsman, deliberately, including the slight imperfection her father had just described. The sunflower varieties she'd researched and planted in the exact location. "What if it's not how you remember it?" she asked carefully. "It won't be," he said with certainty. "Nothing ever is. But I need to reconcile the house in my memory with whatever reality exists now. Memory is a tricky thing. It preserves what we need, discards what we don't. I need to see the truth." 3 days later, they were on the road, Michael surprisingly energetic, despite his recent hospitalization. As countryside replaced suburbs and the landscape began to feel familiar, his commentary became a steady stream of memories. Some Elisa had heard before, others revealed for the first time. "There was a knot in my bedroom floorboards that looked exactly like a face," he recalled. "I'd talk to it sometimes, pretend it was listening to my secrets." Elisa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She had found that knot, had carefully preserved the original floorboard during restoration, positioning a bedside rug so it wouldn't be immediately visible but could be discovered again. As they approached the final stretch of road that would reveal the house, Elisa's phone pinged with a message. It was from her contractor. "Everything's perfect. Key under the blue pot. Good luck." Michael glanced at her. "Work emergency?" "No," she said, putting her phone away. "Just Rachel wishing us a good trip." She watched her father's profile as he drove, noting how his expression changed as they entered his hometown. This was the moment 7 years in the making, the culmination of thousands of hours of work, research, and hope. "Almost there," Michael murmured, and Elisa felt the weight of expectation pressing against her lungs. In minutes, they would round the final bend. In minutes, her father would see what she had created. In minutes, she would know whether she had built a bridge to healing or a monument to pain. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss the next episode. Dad? Elisa's voice seemed to come from far away. Dad, you need to pull over. You're in the middle of the road. Michael blinked, realizing his foot had completely abandoned the gas pedal. He guided the car to the shoulder with mechanical movements, his eyes never leaving the white farmhouse gleaming in the afternoon sun. That's not possible, he whispered. Elisa unbuckled her seatbelt, turning fully toward him. I can explain. But Michael wasn't listening. He pushed open the car door and stepped out, transfixed by the glancing back at the house, her triumph and failure intertwined in its restored walls. Neither spoke on the drive back, the silence heavy with unasked questions and unspoken apologies. It wasn't until they were in the hotel lobby that Michael finally broke the silence. I need time, he said simply, before retreating to his room, leaving Elisa alone with the weight of her well-intentioned mistake. The small hotel dining room was nearly empty when Elisa came down for breakfast the following morning. She'd barely slept, replaying her father's reaction over and over, wondering how she could have misread him so profoundly. After 7 years of secrecy and anticipation, she'd never once considered that he might see her restoration as an invasion rather than a gift. She was on her second cup of coffee when Michael appeared, dressed in the same clothes as yesterday, but somehow looking more settled, the initial shock replaced by something more contemplative. May I join you? He asked formally, as if they were strangers. Elisa nodded, studying his face for clues. He ordered coffee from the waitress, then sat silently until she was out of earshot. I owe you an apology, he began. Dad, no. He held up a hand. Please let me say this. He took a deep breath. My reaction yesterday wasn't fair to you or to the incredible thing you've created. I was overwhelmed and I handled it poorly. Elisa felt a knot in her throat. I should have told you from the beginning. It was wrong to make that decision for you. Perhaps, he acknowledged, but I understand why you didn't. He looked down at his hands, weathered by decades of drawing, building, creating. I've spent my life avoiding the past, Elisa. It was easier than confronting it. The waitress returned with his coffee and took their breakfast orders. When she left, Michael continued, his voice lower. Walking into that house yesterday was like walking into my own memory. The entry hall with the curved banister, the sitting room with the bay window where my mother used to read, the kitchen with the corner where our old radio sat. His eyes met hers. How did you know all those details? I couldn't have told you everything. Elisa smiled tentatively. I did a lot of research, interviewed people in town who remembered the house, found old photographs in Grandma's albums. For some things, I just guessed based on the stories you'd told. The guesses were good ones, he said, and there was a new respect in his voice. The knot in the floorboard, the third step on the stairs that creaks, even the way the light hits the dining room in the afternoon. His words were like a balm to her wounded spirit. You're not angry anymore? Michael considered this. I'm not sure what I am. After I asked you to leave me yesterday, I spent hours just being in that space, sitting in each room, remembering things I thought I'd forgotten. He paused. Did you know there was a height chart penciled on the kitchen doorframe? Elisa nodded. I found traces of it when we stripped the old paint. I had it restored based on old family photos. My father measured me there every birthday, Michael said softly. July 17th, 1961, 4 feet 3 inches, my last measurement before we left. His eyes grew distant. Standing there yesterday, I could almost hear his voice telling me to stand up straight. Impulsively, Elisa reached across the table and took his hand. That's why I did it, so those memories wouldn't be lost. Michael squeezed her hand, and, for the first time since their arrival, the tension between them eased. I spent the night thinking about what this place means now. What you've created isn't just a restoration of a house, it's a restoration of a history I tried to bury. Their breakfast arrived, and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Finally, Michael set down his fork. I'd like to go back today, he said. With you this time. Elisa looked up, hope flaring. Really? He nodded. I want you to show me what you've done. All the choices you made. The research. Everything. After breakfast, they drove back to the house, the journey. markedly different from the previous day. Michael asked questions about the restoration process, listening intently, as Elisa described the challenges of matching historical elements with modern necessities. The plumbing was a nightmare, she admitted as they pulled up to the house. And we had to completely rewire everything, but I wanted to hide all the modern elements so they wouldn't interfere with the historical feel. This time, when they walked up to the porch together, Michael paused to run his hand along the railing. New wood but aged to look original? Elisa nodded, impressed. You can tell. I've been in construction my whole life, remember? There was a hint of pride in his voice. The craftsmanship is excellent, though. I wouldn't have noticed if I wasn't looking for it. Inside, vision before him. The house stood exactly as he remembered it, the wraparound porch with its white railings, the symmetrical windows with deep green shutters, the red brick chimney rising from the gabled roof. Yet it wasn't a ruin or a shadow. It was vibrant, alive, maintained with meticulous care. He began walking toward it, as if pulled by an invisible thread, barely aware of Elisa hurrying to catch up. Dad, wait. Someone's living here, he said flatly. We're trespassing. Elisa moved in front of him, blocking his path. No one's living here, she said. At least, not yet. Michael stared at his daughter, confusion etching deeper lines into his face. What are you saying? She took a deep breath. It's yours, Dad. I bought it 7 years ago. I've been restoring it ever since. The blood drained from Michael's face so quickly that Elisa reached out to steady him, alarmed. That's not funny, Elisa. I'm not joking. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an old-fashioned iron key. I would never joke about this. Michael looked from the key to his daughter to the house, comprehension dawning slowly. 7 years. All those business trips, those weekend projects. Elisa nodded. I found it by accident, really. I was curious about where you grew up, did some online searching, and discovered it was abandoned. The bank had foreclosed on it years ago. No one wanted an old farmhouse that needed so much work. Her words tumbled out faster now. I used my inheritance from Mom for the down payment. I was going to tell you once it was done, but then your health started declining and... Stop, Michael said, his voice strained. He turned away from her, facing the house again. This is too much. Eliza fell silent, watching her father's rigid posture, unable to read whether she was witnessing anger, shock, or something else entirely. You had no right, he finally said, still not looking at her. The words hit her like physical blows. Dad, no. He turned back, his expression unreadable. You had no right to make this decision for me, to assume I wanted this resurrection of the past. You thought you knew better than me what I needed. His voice was quiet but firm. I spent 7 years, and God knows how much money on a project I never asked for. Elisa felt tears threatening. This was not how she had imagined this moment. I wanted to give you back something you lost. Some things are meant to stay lost. Elisa. He looked back at the house, and now she could see the pain in his eyes. Do you have any idea what it was like to leave this place? To know we'd never come back? I spent years trying to forget. But all your stories were just stories, he finished. Selective memories I could control. This, he gestured at the house. This is something else entirely. They stood in silence, the gulf between intention and reception stretching wide between them. In the distance, a mourning dove called, its melancholy notes floating on the spring air. I should take you back to the hotel, Elisa finally said, her voice small. Michael didn't move. Is it the same inside? The question caught her off guard. I tried to make it as close as possible to your descriptions, but I had to guess about a lot of things. He nodded once, his expression inscrutable. I'd like to see it alone. Dad, please, Elisa. His voice softened slightly. I need to do this by myself. Reluctantly, she held out the key. The front. Joysticks a little. You have to pull it toward you while you turn the key. Their fingers brushed as he took the key, and for a moment she saw something like tenderness flicker across his face. Wait in the car. I won't be long. Elisa watched as her father walked slowly up the gravel path to the house, his shoulders squared as if preparing for battle. At the porch steps, he paused, looking up at the facade, then continued up to the front door. The key went in. He pulled and turned as instructed. The door swung open, and Michael Soares disappeared into the house of his childhood. In the rental car, Elisa pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, tears flowing freely now. 7 years of secret labor, of passion and purpose, had culminated in this moment of rejection. She had been so certain this was what her father needed, a tangible connection to his past, a place to reconcile old wounds. Minutes stretched into half an hour, then an hour. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting longer shadows across the property. Just as Elisa was considering whether to check on her father, the front door opened. Michael emerged, closing the door carefully behind him. His walk back to the car was slow, deliberate. When he slid into the driver's seat, his eyes were red-rimmed, but his expression was composed. "Take me back to the hotel," he said quietly. Elisa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As they pulled away, she couldn't help. Elisa became the guide, leading her father through each room, explaining her decisions, the historical research, the compromises, and the victories. Michael asked thoughtful questions, his architect's eye appreciating the technical aspects, even as his memories engaged with the emotional ones. In the kitchen, he smiled at the vintage stove. "This isn't original." "No, but it's the same model from that era. I found it at an antique shop in Pittsburgh and had it restored." "Your mother would have loved this kitchen," he said, running his hand along the countertop. "She always complained that our modern kitchen was too clinical." The comment, so casually linking past to present, his wife to this space, made Elisa pause. "You think she would have approved of all this?" Michael's smile was gentle. "She was the one who encouraged me to talk about this place, even when I resisted. She knew how much it shaped me." He looked around, taking in the details Elisa had so carefully curated. This was her kind of project, passionate, deeply personal, slightly impractical. "Slightly impractical," Elisa laughed. "Try wildly impractical. My accountant thinks I've lost my mind." "What did you tell him?" "That some investments can't be measured in financial returns." Michael nodded, understanding passing between them. He moved to the back door and looked out at the property. "What about the oak tree, the one I used to climb?" "Still there," Elisa said, "though an arborist had to save it. Disease had taken hold, but we caught it in time." She led him outside to the massive tree, its sprawling branches creating a canopy over the backyard. "I thought about building a treehouse, but that seemed like overstepping." "Probably wise," Michael agreed with a small smile. He reached out to touch the rough bark. "I fell out of this tree when I was 9, broke my arm." "I know," Grandma told me. "She said you climbed back up one-handed as soon as the cast came off." She was furious, he recalled, the memory bringing genuine warmth to his expression. They spent the rest of the day exploring the house and grounds, Michael gradually transitioning from passive recipient to active participant, suggesting minor improvements, noting details Elisa had missed and sharing stories triggered by each space. As afternoon faded to evening, they sat on the porch swing, the one Elisa had commissioned with its deliberate imperfection, listing slightly to the left, looking out over the property. "What happens now?" Michael asked finally. "With the house?" It was the question Elisa had been dreading. "That's up to you," she said carefully. "It's your house. I put it in your name." Michael turned to her, surprised. "You what?" "The deed is in your name. Has been from the beginning." She looked down at her hands. "I never intended to keep it for myself. It was always meant to be yours." The weight of this revelation settled between them as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The gentle creaking of the porch swing punctuated the silence. "I don't know what to say," Michael finally admitted. "You don't have to say anything right now," Elisa assured him. "There's no rush to decide." But as they continued swinging in the gathering dusk, something had clearly shifted. The house was no longer just a restoration of the past. It had become a possibility for the future, a connection bridging what was lost and what might still be found. The third day dawned with a gentle rain pattering against the windows of their hotel rooms. Over breakfast, Michael announced he wanted to meet the people who had helped Elisa with the restoration. "I'd like to thank them," he explained, "and hear their perspectives on the process." Elisa made several calls, and by mid-morning, despite the continuing drizzle, they were back at the house. The first to arrive was Harold Jenkins, an 82-year-old carpenter who had overseen much of the woodwork restoration. "So you're the famous Michael," Harold said, shaking Michael's hand firmly. "Your daughter wouldn't stop asking questions about how things used to look. Drove us half crazy with her attention to detail." Michael laughed. "She gets that from me, I'm afraid." Harold's weathered face broke into a grin. "Well, it paid off. This place hasn't looked this good since your grandfather owned it." "My grandfather?" Michael looked to Elisa in confusion. Harold nodded. "Oh sure, this place was built by Samuel Suarez in 1912. Your father was born here, same as you." "I didn't know that," Michael said softly. "Dad never mentioned it." "Folks didn't talk much about family history back then," Harold said, leading them through to examine the restored crown molding in the dining room. "Your father was a proud man. Losing this place hit him hard." Throughout the day, others arrived. The historic preservationist who had helped research the property's original details, the gardener who had restored the grounds based on old photographs, the plumber who had found ingenious ways to hide modern pipes within historic walls. Each brought stories, not just of the restoration, but of the house's longer history. Michael learned that his grandfather had expanded the original farmhouse to its current size, that his own father had added the bay window in the sitting room, that the property had once included 30 acres of productive farmland. By late afternoon, the rain had cleared, and they stood in the backyard with Rita Hernandez, the landscape architect who had rehabilitated the gardens. "Those rose bushes," Michael said, pointing to a cluster of bushes along the south fence. "My mother loved roses. Are they original?" Rita smiled. "Not exactly original, but they're descended from cuttings your mother shared with her neighbor, Mrs. Collins, back in the day. Mrs. Collins' daughter still had them in her garden in Philadelphia. Elisa tracked them down." Michael turned to his daughter, visibly moved. "You found my mother's roses?" Elisa nodded. "It took some detective work, but yes, they're genetically the same roses she planted." As Rita excused herself to examine a drainage issue near the old well, Michael and Elisa walked toward the rose bushes, their subtle fragrance heightened by the recent rain. "I keep discovering layers to what you've done here," Michael said. "It's not just the physical restoration. You've recovered a family history I never fully understood." Elisa bent to touch one of the delicate pink blooms. "I learned so much about our family while researching this place. Grandma helped a lot before. She passed. She had stories I'd never heard." "Like what?" Michael asked, genuinely curious. "Like how your father used to play the fiddle on this very porch on summer evenings, or how your mother started a small lending library out of the front parlor during the Depression." She straightened, meeting her father's gaze. "They weren't just stories to me, Dad. They were pieces of who we are, who you are." Michael absorbed this, looking around at the property with new eyes. "I never thought of it that way. To me, this was just the place we lost, the failure that defined us afterward." "But it's more than that," Elisa said gently. "It's where 4 generations of our family lived, laughed, struggled, and persevered. The loss was just one chapter of a much longer story." As the sun began to set, turning the rain-washed world golden, they sat at the kitchen table, a restored antique that Elisa had found in a barn sale 2 counties over. Michael ran his fingers over a small notch in the wood. "I made this mark," he said with quiet amazement. "I was carving a toy boat and slipped with the knife. My mother was furious." "I know," Elisa smiled. "Mrs. Petrovich from town told me. She was having tea with your mother when it happened." Michael shook his head in wonder. It's extraordinary how memory lives in objects, in places. He looked up at his daughter. "I've spent my career creating spaces for other people's futures, never thinking about preserving the past." "Is that why you became an architect?" Elisa asked. "Because of losing this house?" Michael considered this, perhaps for the first time. "Maybe. I never made that connection explicitly, but yes, I suppose so. Creating permanent structures, designing spaces that would endure. It could have been my response to having permanence taken away. They sat in companionable silence as twilight deepened outside the windows. The kitchen, with its blend of historic charm and subtle modern conveniences, encapsulated Elisa's entire approach, honoring the past while making it livable for the present. "I've been thinking about your mother a lot while being here," Michael said finally. "She always wanted to see where I grew up, but I refused to come back. Too painful," I said. Regret tinged his voice. "She would have loved what you've done." "I felt her with me sometimes," Elisa admitted. "During the restoration, when I was making difficult decisions or hitting dead ends, I'd think, what would Mum say? And somehow the answer would come." Michael reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not just for the house, but for helping me see it, and myself differently." Later, as they locked up to return to their hotel, Michael paused at the front door. "I'd like to stay here tomorrow night," he said suddenly. "Can we do that? Is it furnished enough?" Elisa's face lit up. "Yes, the bedrooms are completely finished. I've been staying here during my work visits." "Just one night," Michael clarified, "to see how it feels." But they both recognized it for what it was. Not an ending, but a beginning, a willingness to incorporate this restored piece of history into his present life. As they drove back to the hotel in the deepening darkness, Michael gazed out the window, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said, "architects are trained to think about how people will use a space in the future. We rarely consider how the past shapes those same spaces." He turned to look at his daughter. "You've taught me something important, Elisa. The best restorations don't just preserve what was, they create a bridge to what can be." In the soft glow of the dashboard lights, Elisa saw her father not as the resolute architect or the wounded son, but as a man discovering a new perspective on his own story, a perspective that might just be expansive enough to include healing, reconciliation, and an unexpected future in a house with a very long memory. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Michael and Elisa were sorting through old documents Elisa had collected during her research, property deeds, tax records, newspaper clippings about the Soares family, when a car pulled into the driveway. "Are you expecting someone?" Michael asked, glancing out the sitting room window. Elisa joined him, frowning slightly. "No, I don't recognize that car." They watched as an older couple emerged from the vehicle, the man helping the woman navigate the gravel driveway with her cane. Both appeared to be in their late 70s, well-dressed and moving with the deliberate care of advanced age. "Maybe they're lost," Elisa suggested, already moving toward the front door to offer assistance. Michael followed, an inexplicable unease settling over him. There was something familiar about the set of the man's shoulders, the way he tilted his head. As he looked up at the house, Elisa opened the door just as the couple reached the porch steps. "Can we help you?" she called. The man looked up, startled, as if he hadn't expected anyone to be there. "Oh, I'm sorry to intrude. We were just driving through, and I wanted to show my wife this old place. I didn't realize anyone was living here." There was an awkward pause as the couple and the Soares regarded each other. Then the man's eyes widened in recognition as he looked at Michael. "Michael? Michael Soares?" His voice carried a hint of disbelief. Michael stiffened beside Elisa. "Yes." The man's face broke into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's Robert Caldwell." The color drained from Michael's face. Without a word, he turned and walked back into the house, disappearing down the hallway. Confused, Elisa looked from her father's retreating figure to the startled couple on the steps. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Who are you?" The woman spoke for the first time, her voice gentle. "Perhaps we should go, Robert. This was a mistake." But Robert Caldwell seemed unable to move, his eyes fixed on the doorway where Michael had vanished. "I never thought I'd see him again, or this house." He turned to Elisa. "Are you his daughter?" Elisa nodded cautiously. "Elisa Soares. And you are—" "Robert Caldwell," he repeated, as if the name should mean something to her. When she showed no recognition, he added quietly, "The man who cost your family this house." Understanding dawned on Elisa like a cold wave. This was the wrong person her grandfather had trusted, the bad investment that had resulted in financial ruin and their hasty departure 51 years ago. "I think you should leave," she said, her protective instincts flaring. The woman, presumably Mrs. Caldwell, touched her husband's arm. "Robert, please, let's go." But Robert seemed rooted to the spot. "I need to speak with him. I've waited half a century to make things right." Elisa was about to refuse when she heard her father's voice behind her. "It's okay, Elisa. Let them in." She turned to find Michael standing in the hallway, his posture rigid but his expression composed. Reluctantly, she stepped aside, allowing the elderly couple to enter the foyer. The tension in the entry hall was palpable as the four stood in awkward silence. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice neutral. "This is a surprise, Robert." "For me as well," Robert replied. "When we drove by and saw the house restored, I never imagined you'd be here." He gestured to the woman beside him. "This is my wife, Helen." Helen offered a small smile. "I've heard so much about you and this house over the years, Michael. It's like meeting a character from a story." Michael nodded stiffly but didn't return the smile. "What brings you back to town?" "Helen's sister lives in the area. We visit every few months." Robert looked around the entry hall, taking in the restored details. "The house, it looks just as I remember it." "That was the goal," Elisa said, still wary. "I've spent 7 years restoring it." Robert's eyebrows rose. "You did this? It's remarkable work." An uncomfortable silence fell again until Helen spoke. "Perhaps we could sit down. Standing is difficult for me these days." Michael hesitated, then gestured toward the sitting room. "Of course." Once they were seated, the Caldwells on the sofa, Michael in an armchair, and Elisa perched tensely on the window seat, Robert cleared his throat. "I owe you an explanation, Michael, and an apology that's 51 years overdue." Michael's expression remained guarded. "It's a little late for apologies, don't you think?" "Yes," Robert acknowledged. "Far too late, but necessary nonetheless." He leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. "I've carried the weight of what happened to your family every day since." Michael's laugh was short and bitter. "Forgive me if I find that hard to believe. You seem to land on your feet quite well after our financial setback." Robert winced. "I understand your anger, but there's more to the story than you know." He looked to his wife, who nodded encouragingly. "The investment scheme that ruined your father, I was a victim too. I lost everything, same as your family." "That's not how my father told it," Michael said coldly. "Your father believed I had inside information, that I deliberately misled him." Robert's voice was steady despite the difficult conversation. "I didn't. I was just as deceived as he was. The difference is, I was younger, without a family to support. I could start over more easily." Elisa watched her father's face, seeing doubt flicker across his features. "If that's true, why didn't you ever explain this to my grandfather?" "I tried," Robert said simply. "He wouldn't see me, wouldn't take my calls. By the time I learned where you'd relocated, he had made it clear he wanted no contact." He sighed deeply. "I respected his wishes, though it haunted me. When my own investments eventually recovered years later, I tried to find your family again, to make restitution, but you'd moved on and your father had passed away." Michael sat perfectly still, absorbing this revelation. "You're saying you tried to pay us back?" Robert nodded. "I set up a trust. It's been accumulating interest for decades, waiting for Azores to claim it." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel, a sound that seemed to emphasize the decades that had passed. The lives lived in parallel, shaped by misconceptions and missed connections. Helen reached into her handbag and withdrew an envelope. "We brought this in case our paths ever crossed." She handed it to Michael. "The trust documents, it's all legally binding." Michael took the envelope but didn't open it, his expression unreadable. "Why now? Why keep this trust going for all these years?" "Because debt doesn't disappear just because it can't be paid," Robert said quietly. "What happened may not have been my fault, but I benefited from recovery while your family struggled. That wasn't right." He gestured around the beautifully restored room. Seeing this house again, knowing you've reclaimed it, it feels like the circle is finally complete. Michael stood abruptly, the envelope clutched in his hand. I need some air. Without another word, he walked out onto the porch, leaving Elisa alone with the Caldwells. Helen's kind eyes found Elisa's. This must be quite a shock for both of you. Elisa nodded, trying to process the implications. My father has carried this wound his entire life. The loss of this house shaped everything that came after. Robert too, Helen said softly. He's told me the story of this house and your family countless times over our 43 years of marriage. The guilt never left him. Robert's face showed the truth of his wife's words, decades of remorse etched into the lines around his eyes and mouth. I didn't just cost your family a house, did I? I cost Michael his sense of security, his trust in the world. Yes, Elisa acknowledged, but maybe understanding the full story can help heal some of that. Through the window, she could see her father standing at the porch railing, staring out at the property, the envelope still unopened in his hand. The tightness in his shoulders spoke of internal conflict. Will he accept it, do you think? Robert asked, following her gaze. The trust fund. It can't undo the past, but it might help secure this house's future. I don't know, Elisa admitted. He's only just beginning to make peace with being here again. Helen reached for her husband's hand. We should go, Robert. We've said what we came to say. The rest is up to Michael. As they rose, Robert looked around the room once more. You've done something extraordinary here, Elisa. This house was always special. It deserves a second chance. His eyes met hers. People do too. Elisa walked them to the door, watching as they made their slow way back to their car. As they drove away, she turned to find her father standing in the doorway behind her. Is it true? She asked. What he said about trying to make amends. Michael held up the still unopened envelope. I don't know, but after 51 years, I think I'm finally ready to hear the whole story. His voice was tired but resolved. This time I thought I knew exactly what happened, who was to blame. Now I'm not sure of anything. Elisa took a step toward him. Are you okay? He considered the question carefully. Not yet, but maybe someday. He looked back at the house, the physical manifestation of both loss and recovery. It seems we both have restoration projects that aren't quite finished. As they stood together on the threshold of the house that had come to represent so much to both of them, Elisa realized that the most significant renovations often happened not in spaces, but in the hearts and minds of the people who inhabited them. And like any meaningful restoration, the process couldn't be rushed. It required patience, care, and a willingness to see beyond the damaged exterior to the solid foundation underneath. The envelope sat unopened on the kitchen table between them, a stark white rectangle against the warm wood grain. Evening had fallen, and they'd eaten a simple meal picked up from the town's only diner, neither particularly hungry after the day's revelations. Are you going to open it? Elisa finally asked, nodding toward the envelope. Michael traced its edge with his fingertip. I'm not sure it matters anymore. Of course it matters, Elisa countered. If what Robert said is true, it changes everything you believed about what happened. Does it? Michael looked up, his eyes tired. The outcome was the same. We lost the house. We left in the middle of the night. My father was never the same. He pushed the envelope away slightly. Intentions don't change consequences. Elisa considered this. No, but they might change how you feel about those consequences. She leaned forward. Dad, you've carried this burden of betrayal your whole life. What if it wasn't betrayal at all? Just tragedy? Michael stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened yard where fireflies had begun to blink their silent messages. I built my entire understanding of trust, or lack of it, around what happened here. If Robert is telling the truth, then what does that say about all the barriers I've constructed, the relationships I've avoided? Elisa joined him at the window. It says you're human. We all create narratives to make sense of our pain. Her father's reflection in the glass looked suddenly older, the lines in his face deeper in the dim kitchen light. Your mother used to say something similar, that people tell themselves stories to survive. She was right, Elisa said softly. And sometimes we need to revise those stories when new information comes to light. Michael turned to face her. Like you've revised this house, taking what was broken and making it whole again? Something like that, she agreed with a small smile. Michael returned to the table and picked up the envelope. With deliberate movements, he tore it open and removed several folded papers. As he read, his expression shifted from skepticism to surprise to something more complex. "It's real," he said finally, setting the papers down. "A trust established in 1979 with regular contributions since then." He looked up at Elisa. "The current value is just over $2 million. Elisa's eyes widened. $2 million? With interest compounded, over 45 years, and explicit instructions that it's to be used for the restoration and maintenance of the Soares family property, or for the education and well-being of Soares descendants." Michael shook his head in disbelief. He really did try to make amends. "What are you going to do?" Elisa asked. Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gathered the papers and returned them to the envelope. "I need to think. Let's go for a walk." Outside, the summer night was warm and fragrant, the countryside alive with the sounds of crickets and distant frogs. They walked in silence down the long driveway and turned onto the quiet country road, moonlight illuminating their path. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Michael said, after they'd walked for several minutes. "That conversation we had in my kitchen 6 months ago, when you suggested coming back here and I said some doors are better left closed." "I remember," Elisa nodded. "I was wrong," he said simply, "not just about the house, but about everything. I've spent my life designing open, welcoming spaces for other people while keeping my own life carefully closed off." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Why did you really do this, Elisa?" "The truth." She didn't hesitate. "Because I was losing you. After Mom died, you retreated. I could feel you slipping away, not just from me, but from life itself." Her voice caught. "When I found this house, it felt like a way to bring you back, to give you something concrete to reconnect with." Michael took a deep breath, absorbing her words. "And instead, you found something neither of us expected." "The truth," Elisa said. "Yes." He started walking again, his pace slower, more thoughtful. "The truth about Robert, about what really happened, about how one misunderstanding can shape entire lives." They had reached a small bridge spanning a narrow creek, the same creek Michael had mentioned playing in as a child. They stopped in the middle, leaning against the railing to watch the moonlight glimmer on the moving water below. "I've made a decision," Michael said quietly. "Two, actually." Elisa waited, not wanting to interrupt his train of thought. "First, I'm going to accept Robert's trust fund, not for myself but for the house, to ensure it remains in the family and is properly maintained." He turned to look at her directly. "And second, I'm going to live here." Elisa's surprised intake of breath was audible. "Here? You mean move from Chicago permanently?" Michael nodded. "It's time. My doctors have been telling me the city isn't good for my health. Too much stress, too much pollution." He gestured back toward the house, invisible from their current position but a palpable presence nonetheless. "And I think this place has something to teach me about forgiveness, about second chances." "But what about your life in Chicago? Your friends, your routine?" A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "What friends? Since retirement, I've become something of a hermit, as you well know. As for my routine," he shrugged, "perhaps it's time for a new one." They began walking back toward the house, its white form gradually coming into view as they crested a small hill. Illuminated by moonlight, it looked almost ethereal, a structure out of time. "We'll need to make some additional changes," Michael said, slipping into architect mode. "A proper office where I can continue my consulting work. Maybe convert that small bedroom off the kitchen into a more accessible bathroom, thinking ahead to when climbing stairs might become difficult." Elisa felt joy bubble up inside her, but tempered it with caution. "Are you sure about this? It's a big change." Michael stopped, looking at the house, truly looking at it as a future home, not just a relic of the past. "I'm sure, for the first time in years, I'm sure about something." He turned to his daughter, his expression open and unguarded. "When your mother died, I thought my story was ending, but standing here now, I realize it's just taking an unexpected turn." As they approached the house, Michael paused at the foot of the porch steps. "There's one more thing," he said. "I want you to be part of this, not just as the architect of its restoration, but as its co-owner." Elisa stared at him. "Dad." "No arguments," he said firmly. "This house exists in its current form because of you. Your vision, your persistence, your belief in what it could be." He gestured toward the structure behind him. "Besides, I'm an old man. Someday it will be yours anyway. This way we can enjoy it together for whatever time I have left." Tears pricked at Elisa's eyes. "That's going to be a very long time if I have anything to say about it." Michael laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound that Elisa realized she hadn't heard in years. "Well, with this clean country air and a project to keep me engaged, who knows? I might just surprise my doctors." They climbed the porch steps together, and Michael paused with his hand on the doorknob. "You know, when I was a boy leaving this place, I never imagined I'd return, especially not like this." He pushed the door open, and warm light spilled out to greet them. "Thank you, Elisa, for not letting the past remain the past." As they stepped across the threshold, Elisa felt the weight of 7 years of secrecy finally lift completely from her shoulders. What had begun as an impulsive act of love had evolved into something far more profound. Not just the restoration of a house, but the restoration of a family's relationship with its own history. And while the house had been her gift to her father, his decision to embrace it, to live in it and share it with her, was a gift she had never anticipated receiving in return. 3 months later, the house buzzed with activity as Michael supervised the delivery of the last of his belongings from Chicago. The moving truck had departed, leaving boxes stacked in almost every room, but Michael seemed energized rather than overwhelmed by the chaos. "Where do you want your drafting table?" Elisa called from the converted sunroom that would serve as his home office. "By the east window," he replied, carefully unpacking a box of architectural models. "The morning light is perfect there." The past 3 months had seen a remarkable transformation, not just in the house, which now featured subtle modern adaptations to accommodate Michael's long-term needs, but in Michael himself. His doctors reported improvement in his vital signs, attributing the change to reduced stress and increased physical activity, as he worked alongside local craftspeople to complete the final modifications to the property. Elisa watched her father directing the placement of furniture with the precision of an architect and the enthusiasm of a much younger man. The change in him since their fateful visit was profound. He moved with more energy, laughed more freely, and had even reconnected with old school friends still living in the area. As the afternoon waned, they took a break to share iced tea on the porch, surveying the progress. "I had a call from Robert yesterday," Michael said casually, setting his glass on the side table. Elisa looked up, surprised. After their unexpected meeting 3 months ago, Michael had called Robert once to formally accept the trust fund, but she wasn't aware they'd maintained contact. What did he want? To ask permission to visit. Michael's expression was thoughtful. "He and Helen are coming through town next week. I invited them for dinner." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Elisa asked carefully. Michael nodded. "It's time. 51 years is long enough to hold on to old pain." He gestured to the house, around them. "Being here has helped me understand something important. Our connection to places runs deeper than ownership. It's about the memories they hold, the way they shape who we become." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn wooden object, a roughly carved figure Elisa had never seen before. "I found this last week when I was clearing out my Chicago apartment. It was in a box I haven't opened in decades." Elisa took the small carving, turning it carefully in her hand. It was a simple, child-made horse, the details crude but recognizable. "You made this?" "On this very porch," Michael confirmed. "The summer before we left. My father taught me how to whittle. He took the figure back, running his thumb over its smooth surfaces. I was so angry when we had to leave that I almost left it behind. My mother found it under my bed as we were packing and insisted I take it. Elisa watched her father's face as he studied the small wooden horse. What made you keep it all these years? I'm not sure, he admitted. Perhaps some part of me needed a tangible connection to this place, even as I pretended to have let it go. He set the carving on the porch railing. The point is, I've been thinking about Robert's betrayal, or what I thought was betrayal, for half a century. It defined me in ways I'm only now beginning to understand. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the lengthening shadows across the front lawn. I have something to show you, Michael said, finally standing. Something I've been working on. Curious, Elisa followed him into his newly established office. On the drafting table lay a set of architectural drawings, not of the house, but of a nearby piece of property Elisa recognized from her years of working in the Guillaume area. The old Sullivan farm, she asked, studying the plans. Michael nodded, a hint of excitement in his voice. 20 acres just down the road. It's been abandoned for years. He pointed to his detailed drawings. I'm thinking a community of small, affordable homes, energy efficient, designed to age in place with shared green spaces and a community center. Elisa looked from the plans to her father, startled by the scope of what he was suggesting. You want to develop it? With the trust fund money, he confirmed. Not for profit, but as a legacy project. Quality housing for families who might otherwise be priced out of home ownership, like our family was all those years ago. Understanding dawned on Elisa. You're turning the loss into something positive. Exactly. Michael's eyes were bright with purpose. I've spent my career designing luxury homes and office buildings. Now I want to create spaces that change lives for the better, places that give people the security my family lost. He spread out additional sketches showing thoughtful, modest homes arranged around central courtyards. What do you think? I'd want you involved, of course. Your design sensibility, my architectural experience. Elisa studied the plans, genuine admiration growing as she absorbed the details. The concept was innovative yet practical, combining modern sustainability with traditional community-focused design. I think it's brilliant, she said honestly. There's more, Michael said, pulling out another set of drawings. Phase 2 would be a historical restoration apprenticeship program based right here, using this house as a teaching tool, showing young craftspeople the value of preserving architectural heritage. Elisa sat down, momentarily overwhelmed by her father's vision. You've been busy, Michael smiled ruefully. I've had a lifetime of playing it safe, designing what clients wanted rather than what communities needed. Now I have the chance to build something truly meaningful. He gathered the drawings carefully. Robert's money making amends for Robert's perceived wrongs. There's a circumstances will bring you back, but I've always believed that the connection between a person and the place that shaped them is never truly broken. The house we're leaving tomorrow is more than wood and nails. It's the physical embodiment of our family's journey in this country, built by your grandfather's hands, expanded by mine, meant to be inherited by you. Its loss feels unbearable today, but I want you to know something I'm only beginning to understand myself. What matters is not the structure, but the legacy of values it represents. Your grandfather wrote in this journal about leaving his homeland with nothing but hope and determination. He faced hardships I can barely imagine, yet he persevered. Now it's my turn to start again, and someday it may be yours. Each generation faces its own challenges, but we carry the strength of those who came before us. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. You come from people who don't give up. Whether you someday reclaim this house or build your own path elsewhere, remember that our true inheritance isn't property. It's purpose, persistence, and the courage to begin again. This journal belongs to you now. Add your story to those of the men who came before you and someday pass it to your own children. With love and faith in your future, Dad. Michael lowered the letter, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. All these years, he whispered, I thought he was broken by what happened. That he'd given up? No, Mrs. Petrovich said gently. Your father was many things, but never a man who surrendered to circumstances. He rebuilt your life elsewhere, didn't he? Made sure you had opportunities, education? Michael nodded, remembering his father's relentless work ethic, the multiple jobs, the insistence on Michael's college attendance despite financial struggles. Yes, he did. Elisa placed her hand on her father's shoulder. He knew you'd come back someday. And he was right, Michael said, clutching the journal to his chest, 51 years later than he probably expected, but he was right. As they walked back to the house together, Michael with the journal, Elisa supporting Mrs. Petrovich, the setting sun cast the restored farmhouse in golden light, making it look almost exactly as it must have appeared generations ago when Michael's grandfather first built it. Inside, as Mrs. Petrovich regaled them with stories of the neighborhood's history over tea, Michael carefully examined his grandfather's journal, finding entries dating back to 1890, written in 3 different hands across 3 generations: his, grandfather's, his father's, and a section left blank waiting for his contribution. Later, after their visitor had departed with promises to return soon, Michael sat at his desk with the journal open before him. Elisa found him there, pen in hand, staring thoughtfully at the blank pages. "What will you write?" she asked. Michael looked up, his expression serene. The truth. All of it. The loss, the long absence, and the unexpected return. He gestured to the house around them, to the architectural plans for the community project, and finally, to Elisa herself. The story of a journey that took half a century, a restoration that took 7 years, and a homecoming that neither of us saw coming. Elisa smiled, recognizing in her father's face a peace she'd never witnessed before. It's a good story. The best kind, Michael agreed, beginning to write in firm architect's script, one that isn't ending but beginning again. Outside, night fell softly on the house that had waited so patiently for its family's return, a house that had endured abandonment, decay, and painstaking restoration to become not just a reconstruction of the past, but a foundation for the future. Within its walls, the circle that had been broken 51 years ago was finally complete, and a new chapter was being written in a story that had proven, against all odds, to be far from. Certain poetry to that, don't you think? Before Elisa could respond, there was a knock at the front door. "Are you expecting someone?" Michael asked. Elisa shook her head, equally confused. They went to answer the door together, finding an elderly woman on the porch, perhaps in her 80s, leaning heavily on a cane. "Can we help you?" Michael asked. The woman's weathered face crinkled into a smile. "Michael Suarez. My goodness, you've grown up." Her eyes twinkled with amusement at her own understatement. Michael stared at her, recognition slowly dawning. "Mrs. Petrovich?" She nodded, pleased. "You remember, I wasn't sure you would. I was your neighbor across the way back when we lived here the first time." Michael finished for her. "Of course I remember. You used to bring us cherry preserves every summer." "Still do," she said, holding up a small jar wrapped with a gingham cloth. "When I heard you were moving back, I had to bring some by. Tradition, you know." Michael ushered her inside with genuine delight, making introductions to Elisa. As they settled in the sitting room, now mostly unpacked and arranged in a comfortable blend of original period pieces and modern necessities, Mrs. Petrovich looked around with approval. "You've done this old place proud," she told Elisa. "It's like stepping back in time, but better." "That was the goal," Elisa smiled. Mrs. Petrovich turned her attention back to Michael. "I remember the day your family left," she said, her voice softening. "Such a sad business. Your father was a good man who trusted the wrong person." Michael nodded, no longer flinching at the memory. "Yes, he was. Though I've recently learned the story was more complicated than I knew." "Often is," the old woman agreed sagely. "Life's rarely as simple as heroes and villains." She reached into her large handbag and withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age. "That's actually why I came. When I heard you were back, I remembered something I've kept all these years." She handed the envelope to Michael. Your father left this with me the day you all departed. Asked me to keep it safe, said someday you might want it. With all the chaos of your leaving, I'm not sure he ever told you about it." Michael took the envelope with trembling hands. No, he never mentioned it. The seal had long since dried out, and the flap came open easily. From inside, he withdrew a folded document and a small brass key. "The original deed to this property," he breathed, scanning the document. "And this key?" Mrs. Petrovich pointed to the document. "Read the back." Michael turned the deed over. On the reverse, in his father's neat handwriting, was a brief note. "For Michael when he's ready to come home. The key opens the strong box buried beneath the oak tree, 3 feet from the trunk on the eastern side. Whatever troubles befall us, now remember that houses can be rebuilt and families endure. Dad." The room fell silent as Michael stared at the message from 51 years in the past. Elisa moved to her father's side, reading over his shoulder. "A strongbox?" she asked quietly. Michael looked up at Mrs. Petrovich, who nodded encouragingly. "Your father told me there was a family heirloom he couldn't take with you, but couldn't bear to leave behind entirely. So he buried it, hoping someday you'd return." Without a word, Michael rose and headed for the back door, the key clutched in his hand. Elisa and Mrs. Petrovich followed as quickly as the elderly woman could manage. In the backyard, Michael strode directly to the massive oak tree, the one Elisa had saved from disease, and oriented himself to the eastern side. "Here," he said, pointing to a patch of ground. "It would be here." Elisa rushed to the garden shed and returned with a shovel. Michael began to dig carefully, methodically, removing the soil in measured scoops. 3 feet down, the shovel struck something solid with a dull thud. Kneeling, Michael brushed away the remaining dirt to reveal a small metal box, weathered, but intact, its lock green with verdigris. With shaking hands, he inserted the brass key and turned it. The lock resisted at first, then gave way with a reluctant click. Inside the box, wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved it remarkably well, lay a leather-bound book. Michael lifted it out reverently, unwrapping the protective covering to reveal a journal. The leather cracked but still supple. "My grandfather's journal," he said softly, recognizing the distinctive binding. The one he brought from the old country when he immigrated. Dad used to read from it sometimes, stories about our family history. He opened the cover carefully, and a folded paper fell out. A letter in his father's handwriting dated the day before they left the house. Michael began to read aloud. "My dear son, if you're reading this, you've found your way home. I don't know how many years will pass before this happens or what. Over.